Hey, deserving listeners, 90-Day Fiancé, let's watch. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. As I always say, everything I say in reaction to this is completely speculative and should be considered as such. Let's watch.
Like, for me, I didn't have the best last relationship, and I was accused so much, and it turned out to be him.
Yeah.
So he's getting that face again. Is it genuine? It's that... So the first few times I saw that face, I thought, okay, he's having a compassion and care. But now I wonder if that face means like, oh yeah, you're weak. I understand. This is your problem. Not really, I'm insecure, but really you're kind of the broken person. I don't know. Am I reading into this? Let's rewind it.
Good to be true. So I think I'm always going to have to work on that.
Like, for me, I didn't have the best last relationship, and I was accused so much, and it turned out to be him.
Yeah.
I was constantly cheated on.
Do you know what I mean? It's that face that he makes. At the first number of times we saw that with Rose and with Liz, I thought, okay, it's him communicating that he cares, and I'm just going to give it the benefit of the doubt and say that he does, but I don't know. So I guess it doesn't really matter. I think what I'm doing is I'm looking for an indication of like, where is this headed? Because if this is headed toward the same situation as it always has been, then I don't want to get my hopes up. I don't want to get my heart involved personally. Whereas if it is, then I do want to open up, I guess. Is that what's happening? But I'm reading into things. I'm trying to see the signs. And of course, that's ridiculous. There's no way to read people's minds through their facial expressions. And I'm guessing based on the history of this couple and of this show, I'm not going to get an elaboration on where Ed is at regarding his understanding of what exactly happened. Does he believe that her issues had nothing to do with what happened? Her issues had nothing. She reacted the way a healthy person. What else are you supposed to do in a situation like that? My guess is he's done what he did at the engagement party dozens of times, and all those other times she would stick around and try to deal with him, and it would always go badly, and she would continue to be victimized. And so she just bolted. She started wandering down the street. She probably also knew that she couldn't get a car because the production team would probably somehow force her to get into a car with Ed or get on the phone, because we did see that. So she might have been trying to get away from Ed and the crew, because she knew the crew was trying to get them together and trying to get them to interact. By the time that they actually did interact, it was further him attacking her, and she's trying to answer the question. I'm not a lesbian. I didn't have an affair, and he just doesn't listen. Well, you were really drunk, and oh well, this is that. Well, what am I supposed to believe, and all that kind of stuff. And we saw it, and so she knew that because she's been through it, and she bolted. So there's nothing about what she did that was wrong at all. You could argue that throwing the ring was kind of not okay, but I think understandable. And then she found it. I have a feeling she threw the ring thinking, well, I know, because she didn't just huck it into a river. It looks like she just kind of dropped it over a fence, and at a really convenient place that wouldn't, because it was behind a bush and no one would see it. And anyway, but if he walks away thinking they were equally to blame for this, then I don't think he fully grasps the problem and thus won't be able to work on it.
I think it's a trigger, like when I say no or please believe me.
And I don't trust you.
You don't trust me. It brings that trauma back up. It makes me feel like, okay, you're questioning me and you're saying this. I was like, I think it's you.
Let me own that. It's me. I think there's a lot of internal stuff that you're dealing with, and there's a lot of internal stuff that I'm.
You hear that? There's a lot of, you and we both have internal. No. And she's framing it as her trauma is what sort of affected her behavior. Well, if her traumas caused her to do what she did, I would say, those are good trauma responses. And that's actually interesting to think. I don't know, obviously, but I wonder if for her, it took this past relationship to be abusive and accusational while the guy was cheating anyway, for her to adjust a little bit more towards assertiveness of just like, oh my God, I'm not going to do that again. And she's learning to stick up for herself and to not take that kind of crap. And to her, it's a trauma response, and maybe it is, but it also could be balancing the equation a little bit, right? I don't know.
Dealing with, and unless we can get that out of the way, we have a better chance of failing.
Yeah.
I want to marry you, but I don't want to be a divorcee again. And you don't either.
No.
Let's get through this. Then we can talk about if we're ready to get married. And when it feels right, we'll know. I think we'll know.
Even though our relationship, it seems like it's always, on edge, we always end up coming back together because we're crazy, we're weird.
Yeah, so I think what she is talking about is that there is tenderness, there are apologies, there is compassion, there is care. And if you choose to believe that Ed is being authentic and real, then that's true. I don't think it's sufficient for change to occur or sufficient to address what really happened. I mean, it was high-level, aggressive verbal attacks from him repeatedly without any care of what she was saying. I'm not a lesbian. I didn't have an affair with her. You're insecure. What else? I mean, that should have ended it right there, particularly if it's happened dozens of times prior with Liz and maybe with others as well, with Rose. So you'd think it would kick him out of that, at least kind of. And, but anyway, so I think what she's talking about is behind closed doors, stuff that often doesn't get picked up by the camera. She does see good in him. She does see that maybe there's a side of him that's potentially a good partner. And we all know that in abusive relationships, victims will almost always have this perspective as the cycle is coming around to the side where the abusive individual is being apologetic and remorseful-ish, or at the very least trying to reconcile. And the victim, because of their self-worth issues, because they've been beaten down in the relationships and brainwashing and gaslighting, in relation to the abuse, the victim is like, oh, this is great. And this is the person I've been waiting for. I'm so glad that he's finally here. And we just have to keep doing this. But of course, the victim can't zoom out because they're just trying to survive day to day and see that it's just part of the cycle. They just keep coming around. And there's this period of time where he is being nice and, apologizing-ish. Again, I don't really know if he really understands the harm that he did and is really remorseful about that. There's a chance that when he really comes down to it, he believes what he did was at least mostly okay. That he's like, yeah, I get insecure sometimes, but she was drunk. I mean, let's be honest, and it looked weird. So I could imagine him saying, and then for him to say something like, and sometimes she's pretty crazy and she talks and she says a lot of weird stuff. And so I was just trying to hold her to what you'll hear people like Ed will say this. Will be like, I was just trying to understand the situation. Or I was just trying to hold her accountable for what she did. You'll hear these phrases and it's like, that's not what happened. What happened was you were arrogantly, verbally, and emotionally abusing them, which isn't okay. That's not holding, and plus, she's your partner. You can't hold her accountable. That's what you do to children or to employees or something, not to your partner.
This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Unfortunately, life doesn't come with a user manual. Navigating all the various challenges we face can make you feel unsure or stuck in place. Whether it's a relationship, or going through grief, or considering a new career. And, generally speaking, a therapist can really help with that. By helping you to explore your feelings, and by giving you the space to clarify what you want to do. In my life, I can't imagine where I'd be without the therapy I've had. During some of the biggest moments of my life, therapists have been there for me. To slow me down, to listen to me, to help me explore. Well, that's where BetterHelp comes in. As the world's largest therapy service, BetterHelp has matched 3 million people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists available 100% online. Plus, it's affordable. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to match with a therapist. If things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. It couldn't be simpler. No waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/Kirk. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk.
We're different. For me, there's no walking away. And I'm not one to give up, but I do see Ed as someone easily to give up. So I don't even know if he's ever gonna be ready to get married.
If I were their friend, I would say, let's not talk about marriage. There's no reason, really. This isn't a 90-day fiancé situation. There's not a green card visa situation. How about, if I were their friend, this is what I would say. How about you wait until you have 6 months, at least, maybe 12 months, where there are no incidents like what happened. If that happens, then start thinking about whether or not you should get married to this person. Because if you just are like, well, we had a good couple weeks, and then a massive blow up, because I think they've really only been dating for a couple years at the most, right? And they've broken up 8 or 9 times, maybe more. And then you've got to think in between there was a lot of other fights. So that's on average, that's got to be like once every 3 or 4 weeks, a massive blow up like this. So I would say, don't even think about it. Try if you want to, but don't think about committing to each other until you have a extended period of time without any major conflict. Now, as a therapist, I don't have an opinion because people can do what they want to do with their lives. There's no real clinical aspect to this. It's all a matter of what do they want. And if they were my client and they wanted to get married, even with their current situation, I might have a personal opinion in the back, but I know enough clinically to know that I know nothing. I learned that the hard way early in my career, that there's no way for me to tell if people are making the right or wrong choice when it comes to these kinds of decisions. It's a very personal choice that people will make. Unless someone is obviously being abused, and then I can clinically have an opinion. But if we're outside of that, so I don't know. So to answer that question, if they were a couple, a client of mine, and I was trying to evaluate that, I would have to know more from Liz as to the extent or if abuse is actually happening, right? And if I did determine and assess through, and often with these couples, I'll meet individually with each so that I can give the victim a chance to be free to say what they want to say to me. And then I probably would say something. I wouldn't say you shouldn't marry him. I would say, given the scenario that's happening right now, until we see X, Y, and Z, I clinically do not have a lot of hope or optimism that the abuse cycle will not go away. That's a weird way of putting it, but I would probably even lay out the different things that I'm looking for as a clinician. I would say, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for that, I'm looking for that. When I see those 3 things, that will give me some optimism that we will be able to, once he gets triggered again, that will begin the abuse cycle, that he and I and you will be able to intervene such that you won't be abused, or at least each time around the cycle, you'll be abused, far less and less and less and less every time. But without seeing those 3 things, I can't predict that. So I might convey that, because that is a clinical opinion that is based on my experience and research. And then by implication, she would be able to make a choice about the rest of her life based on that clinical observation, right? There's a big difference between me saying, you shouldn't marry him because he's going to be abusive. There's a big difference between that, and I clinically do not believe that he is not going to abuse. I clinically believe that he will continue to abuse you until we see the following things. That's a clinical opinion. You can't have a clinical opinion unless it's a very special circumstance as to whether or not someone should marry someone or not, right? So as long as I've given them all the information, it's sort of be like a physician has a patient who has a serious cancer, and the physician is like, well, there's a treatment regimen that has maybe a 5% chance of extending your life another year, but you will probably die within the next 3 years. You might die in 6 months. If you engage in this treatment regimen, there's a good chance that it will do nothing, and it'll make your final 6 months twice as miserable. So what do you want to do? So you give the information, right? And then the individual, the patient, can make a choice. You might prefer them to do one or the other, but as long as you're giving them all the information that you know clinically, then they're free to make the choice that they want to. And again, I learned a long time ago that, to be specific, that there would be couples in the beginning of my career 25 years ago where I was just like, ooh, this couple, they should not be together. and I would determine that because I still had that cultural notion, that arrogance from society that people can determine that. And a lot of people watching this show seem to exhibit that. And I've done it a little bit even with this couple. I try not to. Anyway, and then I would see them over time, over 5-10 years, and I was wrong. They actually were able to work it out and tolerate the conflict that they had. And then I would see another couple and I'd be like, oh my God, this couple is the best. They're perfect. They're in love. They're emotionally intelligent. They're differentiated. They care. And then they break up and they're just like, yeah, it just didn't really work, or the little bit of conflict we had was too much for us, or, I don't think he's really the one for me ultimately as a soulmate. And I was like, oh, what? So that happened a lot in the beginning of my career. And then I was like, you know what? Just knock it off. Stop assuming anything. You know nothing. You know nothing, Jon Snow.
Are those wedding bells? One day.
That face. Do you know what I mean? That blink that he does. What is that? Every time that's happened, it's followed with bad things. At least the way the show is edited. Not immediately, but soon, right? It feels like he's saying, you're weak or something. I don't know. A different facial expression that I would like to see is for him, he kisses her and then he's just like, he has more of a look of remorse, just like, I'm just so sorry of what I did. That look would be more promising, but let's rewind that.
One day.
Now, God knows, they might have edited that. That actually looked a little janky in terms of the edit, but at the very least, that facial expression. And it's funny when I think about it because I have been watching Ed and to some extent Liz for a long time now. And of course, it's just these little snippets of their life, but that I would have such a visceral reaction to a small facial expression of his really points to the amount of time I've spent watching and thinking about them. Because I imagine the first 10 times we saw that face, I didn't really register with me, but now I'm like, oh no. Now, do I believe that Ed can change and that their relationship can be better? Yes, absolutely. If they go to therapy, if they do the work, the therapy would probably have to entail 7 to 10 years, probably weekly to every other week meetings for the first 3 years, and then maybe once a month beyond that, or I don't know, once every 2 weeks for 4 or 5 years. If they did that, then with a therapist that knew what they were doing, then I would actually imagine that things would get better for them. Do I think they're going to get better without that? No. If his issue was more moderate and less delusional, right? He really gets locked in. Then I'd say like, well, maybe, but he gets really locked in and really verbally abusive. You hear that phone call that was leaked by her, I think. That level of issue is not easily swept away by your own hope that it will go away. Okay, well, if you didn't know already, we have merch, and I'm also on Cameo. There should be links below for that if you want to check it out. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.